So, welcome to the show, Dawn. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, me too. So, you're all about wholeness, which we are about on this podcast and in my own work. And tell me what brought you to this work in your own journey. I'd love to know.
A small question that
Yeah.
covers approximately 60 years of my life. Because I began when I was about 20 years old, which was 60 years ago. And um, I had a rather extremely traumatic background. I mean, there are worse for sure. It wasn't in the high end of the extreme. I'd say it was in the lower end of the extremely traumatic. So, for example, I almost died at birth. My mother would lose her temper and get violent, and we were very close. At the same time, she would lose it and get violent and terrifying, and she and my father fought constantly. So it was rough. And somewhere around 20 years old, I realized I needed help. And I took that first step. I mean, what do you at 20 years old, and that's back in 1964 or something like that. Uh, you go to a psychiatrist. I didn't know any different. I didn't, know there was anything else out there. So I went to a psychiatrist, and it began a journey that continues. It didn't end. It's continuing today because Emily, I don't think wholeness is an endpoint.
Right.
I think it's an ongoing process of discovery, of uncovering, of letting go, of reorganizing our conceptions, our paradigm, if you will. Uh, it's a process that just continues, becomes at times challenging, at times deeply rewarding. And if there's one message that I'd want to leave to your listeners is embark on the journey. Go for it. There are lots of guides, so much more than there
Mm.
were 60 years ago when I began, you know, and go for it because I don't know what's better in life than that process of discovering how much more we are than we previously thought.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really helpful to hear you go through this journey and then yeah, at 20 years old realize, okay, I need to go down maybe a more traditional path of healing, and then realizing there's just so much more out there. And I'm excited to talk to you about, yeah, your approach because I really align with it. But I agree that wholeness is a journey, and I love your book's subtitle. um yeah, Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture, an Adventure of a Lifetime. So it's an adventure, it sounds like.
Yeah, it is an adventure. I mean, a good adventure uh, is challenging, and it almost always has surprises.
Yeah.
Almost always. You didn't expect this, or you didn't
Mm.
expect the weather to be like that, or, you know, there are surprises and things that are unexpected that call on you to go in and gather your resources and meet those challenges. But
Yeah.
it's also filled with moments of sheer awe. You come
Mm.
around the corner on a hike, and all of a sudden, a vista opens up in front of you, and you have to stop because it takes your breath away. It's like, oh my God, you know, I think we've all had those experiences if we've gone on any trail, any kind of
Yeah.
real adventure, even traveling, in a van, or you know,
Yeah.
uh, you're gonna you're gonna encounter those things. So that's why I say it's an adventure. It's beautiful
Yeah,
and
that's
challenging.
Yeah, I love thinking of it that way and seeing it because otherwise it can seem overwhelming, it can seem never ending. And the adventure part makes you less of a victim. It's like, okay, you're charting your next steps and you're overcoming challenges. And there's the fun parts too, the adventure. There's the challenges. And yeah, I also want to go travel in a van. So I love that you said that because there's resonance there. And yeah, there's a part of me too that knows there's just so much, yeah, unplanned and unknown, but that's what's fun about it. And I'd love to hear from you. How do we heal childhood trauma? Because I think it sounds like you went down a very traditional approach, but then you found that it wasn't meeting your needs.
Uh, that's a huge question that has many different ways to approach it. But be I'm going to start by keying on something, Emily, that you said, and that is, if you see it as an adventure, you give up being a victim. And that's one of the most important realizations to come to on this healing journey. Now, it's complex because, look, I wasn't even born and I was choking with the cord around my throat and nearly died. And to say, well, I wasn't a victim, I was part of it's like it's there's a craziness to that
Yeah.
because things do happen to us. We get whacked in all sorts of ways. We get deprived the things that we badly need. We're told we're supposed to be a certain way and not these other ways. And to obey that, we lock it in to our very tissues, our very muscles and fascia, connective tissues. We lock in. And so to say, well, I'm the author of this adventure sounds crazy on one hand.
Right.
Okay. And so it's important to acknowledge that. Otherwise, people will think we're just Pollyannish, living in some dream world because, bad things happen, tough things happen. Okay. Now, I had a teacher once, a man named Viktor Frankl. I was fortunate enough to take a course. Have you heard that name, Viktor Frankl?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a psychiatrist in Austria, I believe, and he and his family were incarcerated during the Holocaust. Okay? Jewish family, and he lost every member of his family.
Oh,
Every member. They burnt his books. He was a writer, a psychiatrist, a brilliant man. He was prominent in his field at the time. And all this was taken away. How much worse can it get? Your children. I mean, it makes me want to
yeah.
cry just speaking of it. He came away from that with the realization that the one thing that nobody and no thing can take away from you is your ability to choose your attitude about it.
Right.
I'm going to pause because that's a mouthful and I'm feeling moved saying it.
Mhm.
See, so it's very complex here. How much worse can you get? How much worse does it get in life to have to go through that? Not to mention, God knows how many friends he lost at the same time, right? But his attitude, he developed a whole system of work based on that realization. We have the power, right? Is it devastating? Yes. Did I freeze up as an infant and child? Yes, I couldn't feel. I was kind of fragmented, dissociated, all
Mm,
of that. But I got to the point where I realized, okay, that was what was given me. This is what I do now in this moment in time. And
mm.
it kind of gradually dawned on me that I could write my life adventure. That's a lot. I know. You want
That's
to pause, or you
incredible.
have any questions in there? I'm talking away.
That's incredible. I mean, that you had the opportunity to learn from Viktor Frankl. I love, yeah, his book, Man's Search for Meaning, right?
Yes,
And
yes,
just
yes.
like that powerful message, like just those situations that he went through, those circumstances, and to have that awareness really puts it into perspective. Like, it's not denying that that happened to you, but then how are you moving forward from it? It sounds like your attitude is everything.
Exactly, exactly. If you deny the effects, you are living in, fairyland.
Yeah.
And, you're out of touch, you're out of connection. On the
Yeah.
other hand, if you simply wallow in the effects, blaming the whole world, you never move. You never move out of
Yeah.
there. And, Emily, what I came to, the conclusion that I came to is that each and every one of us is given our curriculum, you know, and for some, it's kind of tough. But sometimes when it's really tough, it's easier to be motivated to embark on the
Yeah.
journey. That if you kind of got it, you're okay.
Yeah.
Everything was not too bad. It was normal. I love that word. It was
Yeah.
normal. You may not be motivated, and you stay kind of where you were, when there's so much more. That's the next message. There's so much more.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I actually had this conversation yesterday. There was this event I went to, the speaker, and that's what she was saying is if you don't have these obstacles, you're not going to change to meet them. And you're really like, as humans, we just crave comfort and stability. We're not going to do something different if nothing is going on to prompt that. So it's
Hmm.
almost like welcoming those obstacles as parts of your journey that you can then move forward and adapt and choose your adventure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to look at it. And I would love to talk with you about some of the effects of yeah, this trauma that you have put together as the four legs of wholeness. I would love for you to share about that with me and my listener.
Yeah, sure. See, I realized early on, actually, that talk therapy, as good as it was, and as helpful, really helpful as it was insufficient, just not enough. That the body has to be addressed, especially the more intense the situation. Okay?
Mm, yeah.
And I have a good friend who is struggling to loosen up her upper body. There was no trauma in
Right.
her family growing up, but there was a rigidity, a way you're supposed to be, and it was enforced with shame and guilt and a whole lot of affection between
Yeah.
her and her father in particular. And, she locked up and is just now beginning to unlock those places. And so trauma comes in many, many ways. Constriction, restriction comes in many, many ways.
Mm.
And there's a discipline that I now teach, which is amazing, given how disconnected I was from my body, into my adulthood. I just not there, just simply not there. That I'm now teaching a system of fluid movement.
Yeah.
It's called continuum, and it's premised on the fact that we're mostly water. This body is mostly liquid. How does liquid move? We
Yeah.
created machines, and then we let the machines be a model for how we are in our body.
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Levers and pulleys, straight lines, when, there's so much potential in a fluid system. I don't know how much more elaboration I need for that to make sense. So help me out here. Just
Yeah. Yeah, it's very helpful, and I agree, like, I've had those physical symptoms too of, like, if I am going into a trauma response or there's stress, then I notice my shoulders are, like, tense up, and it used to be really bad before I found somatic work and really incorporated that, but it's just exactly like our bodies are just connected to our emotions, to our thoughts, and then yeah, the fact that we are made up of water mostly, it's like we should be fluid and moving, and I almost see that quality of emotions as water too. Um,
Mhm.
and I do a lot of like guided movement in my coaching, and so it sounds like this is a movement practice that you have to help like release these kinds of emotions and trauma. Is that right?
Yeah, to free up possibilities, you know, for example, to allow ourselves to be very receptive,
Yeah,
fluid, to receive, to open, at the same time, to be able to be very direct and powerful. Think of water. Think of water running over the rapids and the power in
yeah,
that, and how receptive water is, how adaptable it is, how resilient it is. All those qualities are potential,
yeah.
they're who we are,
Right.
essentially.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's something that I know, but then have never heard in this way where it's like, oh yeah, like that's what we're mostly made up of. So we can move, we can change. We're not stuck, we're not frozen or rigid, and we can be receptive and open and fluid, and changing is incredible. And yeah, like you said, I also had that experience with therapy. I think it was very helpful to an extent. And then realizing that trauma inherently disconnects you from your body because you dissociate, like you were sharing. And I just had that experience too, where it's like, oh, now because of that past experience, it was much harder to just be in my body day to day. And that's what really draw me to, yeah, embodiment work, somatic work, and healing. And yeah, I love to hear from you a little bit about the other ways of healing, like this kind of movement base. And then I know that so you teach in an ayahuasca church, or you hold ceremonies. How does that work?
I'm one of the teachers. It's a Christian ayahuasca church based or originating in Brazil back in the 60s. And now it's in some 20 countries, or maybe 12 countries. We have about 25,000 participants. And yeah, it's an I began with psychedelics when I was in graduate school in 1968, and I was smart enough not to play with them. They are powerful. If there are youngsters listening to your show, Emily, I don't recommend using these substances as a party
Yeah.
experience, hanging out with your friend in the car. These are serious substances and should be used intelligently, either in a psychological or spiritual context that's held by experienced people. And, they're powerful. They're powerful. Um, I can share with you the first time I experienced ayahuasca in this setting was 3 weeks after my mother died. And as I alluded to earlier, we had a challenging relationship.
Yeah.
And halfway through the experience, she just showed up. She was sitting next to me, and we
Wow.
just looked at each other. And she looked young and beautiful, and we didn't say a word. We just sat there. I've had so little healing work to do with her since then. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just amazing. And the
Wow.
thing that was the hardest to believe was that a friend of mine who was sitting on the other side of the room came up afterwards and said, Don, did you know your mother was here tonight? I said, what? How do you know? He said, oh, I saw her.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a wow. I'm
Yeah.
not going to try and explain that. I'll leave
Yeah.
that for others to explain. But that
Uh,
was that was what happened. And, of course, I was enchanted and became a member. And 30 years later, I'm still a member and now a teacher. And yeah.
that's incredible. And I've actually heard this similar like experience where people have, yeah, collect like in the group collectively experience like spirits, and it's like not just one
Mhm.
person, which I think you could attribute like, oh, maybe it was a vision, but it's like, okay, when multiple people are aware, like that's just so cool. And yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity with psychedelics, and that's what brought me to them for, yeah, like treatment resistant depression. And yeah, essentially trying everything and it's not working. I think it helps you access those um altered states of consciousness, right? And in a way that maybe other tools, it's a little bit harder when you have experienced this level of trauma. Is that right?
Absolutely. I couldn't say it any better. How did you get so wise at such a young age?
Probably through going through trauma of my own. Thank you. Yeah, I think that it's just something that I really dove headfirst in, and a lot of my friends are psychedelic assisted therapists, so they help with that piece, and it's something that, yeah, I also, like, from a young age, started learning about trauma and how to heal it, and I think it is a fun journey. Like, I like learning about these things, and I love talking with people that also have this experience and perspective, and I'd love to hear from you about, like, relationships and trauma, because I think that's been something that's been the biggest part of my healing, and I think it's also the hardest part because our relationships often are the source of trauma, right? And so that it's like, how do you create safety in relationships when you already have had pain? What are your thoughts on that?
How many hours do we have? Oh, ah, let me start with my own experience and go from there. Relationships were so challenging in my early life. They really were difficult, and I think for one, um, I'm My hesitation is that there's so many ways to answer that question.
Mm,
I gave it a separate area. So there are four, these four pillars or four
yeah.
dimensions, and I gave it a separate area, but it's very much
Yeah.
related to our psychology. If I believe that if I get close to you, you're going to hurt me badly, if I believe that, and that belief may have been formulated by the time I was a year old, or two, or three, or four. If I believe that, I'm going to have a very ambivalent way of approaching you. I
Right.
may want to get really close, but I also want to get out of there real quick because I know you're
Yeah.
going to hurt me, okay? Or you're going to suffocate me. I'm going to lose my freedom if I get close to you. Okay. So one way or another, or you're going to leave, you're going to abandon me, you're you're going to get really close, but then you're going to take it all away because that's what happened. I know that, it happened in my first whatever, right? I'm making up
Yeah.
scenarios here, but once we formulate those beliefs, they become kind of our operating principle, but they're unknown to us. We can't consciously say that. Now, if we can consciously say that, see, that's the beginning of turning it around. So if we can uncover what we believe to be true about getting really close to another human being, then we can work with it. Then we can challenge it. Say, all right, this is scary, lady. I'm feeling really open and close to you, and we're starting to talk about a future. And all of a sudden I see seven exit doors that are calling me. I just remembered I wanted to do a 6-year hike in Australia in the
Yeah.
outback. And it seems perfectly reasonable. The exit plan seems perfectly logical. I got to go do this. When
Right.
what's driving it is fear of what's going to happen if I allow myself to stay open and close to you. Okay. So that's what makes it so challenging, that these beliefs that will motivate, that will drive us, are not conscious.
Mm,
We simply act in accordance with them. Further, they serve as filters, meaning we will allow into our consciousness what's consistent with those beliefs and keep out what's inconsistent with those beliefs.
yeah.
Right? And so it's difficult when we have beliefs that in one way or another tell us that this is dangerous territory. Okay, that's one. You remember I hesitated to answer and I said there's so many ways
Yeah.
to approach this. And another way to approach it is how many of us have had models for intimate relationships? How many of us could say, I'd like my marriage to be just like mom and dad's,
Right.
right? How many?
Minority for
A
sure.
minority for sure. And that minority could be really small if people are really honest.
Yeah.
Because as a culture, we are not operating at a level where the next step is intimate relationships between two people. Is there a question there, Emily? Is that
Yeah. Why is that?
I don't know. I think it has to do with human evolution.
Right.
I think it has to do with where we are as a species. We all thought the earth was flat, and we all had some wild childhood beliefs about the world and God and all of that. And it's evolved, but it takes hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
You know, this is a very, very interesting. Think about it. You
Right.
know, when, did your grandparents wonder if they were fulfilled in their marriage, if they were
Right.
communicating, if they were really open and vulnerable with each other? These are pretty new concepts
Yeah.
that
So new.
people, yeah, right. So we're all babies at it.
Yeah.
Some of us have immersed ourselves in this consideration, and most are just living their lives. But to really take off all the outer garments, the
Yeah.
personas, okay, and reveal ourselves, boy, that's challenging. That's challenging.
Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah, exactly. Like people very recently, like, yeah, my grandparents were not thinking, like having that level of consciousness to be aware of how they're showing up. And then especially like you were saying, the individual trauma like that can prevent you from doing that. So how can you be in a relationship if you can't really even identify for yourself like what is happening inside of you?
Let's look at the positive side of all this. One of the most wonderful possibilities, in embarking on this journey that we've been talking about, is the possibility of having a real intimate relationship where you can be fully your open-hearted self with another who's doing the same with you. My
Yeah.
wife and I have been together for 40 years,
Wow.
and we're both over 80.
Wow.
And, we look forward to our time together, yeah, right. There's still a vibrancy, there's still an aliveness in our relationship. And they all these things come together. The recognition of the body as a fluid structure. You know, we can still move, we can still play.
Yeah.
We can still enjoy. And again, in our 80s. So, and the
Yeah.
hand I was dealt, I was destined for an early death. No
Mm,
question about it. I almost died, really, when I was 59.
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's incredible to hear though. And I think that can be the most healing thing, like you said, to have that intimate relationship that you can show up fully as yourself. And I think that that's what trauma, when you overcome that, that's the reward, is just being yourself fully, like without those masks, without those filters. And I think that's what everyone wants. Like that's what everyone desires, is just to be themselves and be loved for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I want to speak to the people who believe that they haven't had any trauma in their lives.
Yeah.
And, if you are in a relationship that's emotionally and sexually intimate, and, if you feel really good about yourself in the world, maybe you don't have to do any more work, but in my experience, that's very, very, very few people. That most of us, because of what we said a few minutes ago, that the level of consciousness of the human race has not yet reached full adolescence,
Right.
has
Wow.
not yet reached full adolescence. We all can benefit from this journey.
Absolutely. That's so powerful.
Mhm.
And that's also the piece too, like the collective trauma. It's something I think I learned in my own training is that we're all traumatized to some extent just from living in the collective and the things that go on because of that reason,
Right,
like you said.
right, exactly. Well, if let's put it this way. If you're in a body that's 40 years old and your consciousness has not yet reached 12, that's trauma.
Yeah,
But it's not, it's not personal so much as
right.
it affects you personally, but it's a collective phenomenon. And if we can see that, if we can only see that, there's so much. Trauma is the buzzword today.
Yeah,
Heal trauma. Well, there are a lot of people, a lot of people. I mean, I got a good friend, a new friend, so we don't know each other that long, but he believes his childhood was so fine. There was no trauma, no effects, nothing. He was just fine, except he doesn't know himself below his head.
right.
He doesn't. His like the heart hasn't yet come on board. The whole
Yeah,
body is still like something that simply carries his mind around.
right.
So, that's such a young level of comprehension. Not a lovely person. I like him a lot. But that's why I'm stressing this is for everybody. This is like
Exactly.
we're moving to another level.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Especially, yeah, if you think, yeah, there's definitely people in my life that I know that don't see kind of major events in their lives as trauma. Like, so they think that they don't have trauma, like this friend of yours. But it's so much more than that. Like you said, it's just like your way of being in the world and your consciousness, your self-awareness that I think a lot of these dynamics too are really subtle, like growing up and attachment and um kind of have you said in society there's like we haven't even come to that level of like relating to each other on this deeper level. So obviously like upbringing plays a role in that, but even if you don't experience a huge trauma, it's like these dynamics are still at play, it sounds like.
Absolutely. You summarize it very well, very clearly.
I'm glad. It's just blowing my mind too because of the opportunity there is. And now that we do have this awareness around our bodies and how wise they are, and I know for myself, this is why I love this work and helping women to stop living in their heads because, yeah, I just think it's really limiting. Like you're only accessing a small percentage of your whole being by living that way, right?
Mm, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sitting here. I'm very impressed with you can't be 30 years old yet, are you?
I am, yeah.
You're 30? You're
Early 30s, 33.
early 30s. That's a wow, I mean,
Thank you.
I couldn't have spoken like that in my early 30s.
I
See,
appreciate
I
it.
think we're seeing how things are evolving, that there are folks like yourself in their early 30s who are recognizing all this, and it's beautiful. It's so
Thank you
beautiful.
so much. Yeah.
Such a,
I mean,
such
yeah,
a
I feel that.
privilege to talk to you.
Yeah, you as well. I really, really appreciate wisdom and your lived experience. I would not have guessed that you were over 80 years old at all. And like you said, it's like more than that. It's like your energy and your aliveness and like your ability to be in your body, I think, is contributing to that, you know?
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. And again, I would have been dead. I came that close at 59. And one way of looking at it is that, the effects of the first 20, 25 to 30 years of my life caught up with me. And what kept me from dying was what I'd grown over the next 25 years, that it just was enough to keep me alive.
Wow. I have heard that. I have heard that, yeah, it really does take um an approach, like a lifetime approach versus like I've heard people that have passed away because even though they got healthy the first 20 years, they were really, really unhealthy. So I totally believe that. And I'm so happy to hear. Did you have a near death experience or
I had a major heart attack,
yeah.
and the pain was in my solar plexus instead of my chest or back. And so I decided that it wasn't a heart attack, that it was in my gut, and I didn't do anything about it. To make a long story very short, because I know we're running out of time, I didn't see a cardiologist for 3 months. And when he looked in there, he couldn't believe I was still walking.
Oh my,
And he said part of my heart was dead, but maybe the other part would wake back up, was hibernating, after surgery. Well, 3 months after surgery, he called me in after a test and said, "We got to do another test because this one is telling me your heart was normal, and that cannot be." And okay, and it
wow.
was, and still is.
Yeah.
All that and my cardiac muscle, there's some other issues with the vessels that they put in, but the muscle itself, the heart muscle, is still completely normal. So yeah, yeah, yeah. So
And
that's
look at you now. That's incredible. Yeah. Wow. But I think it took that sense of awareness that you had and then it sounds like you didn't really attach to the issue and make it like mean something about yourself. Like you just kind of move through it, right?
well, it focused me more on my heart and
Mhm.
what the heart is about. And that would be another conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I would
But
love to have another conversation with you. This has been incredible. Where can my listener find you online? How can they find you and your work?
my website is www.pathsofconnection.com. You want me to spell that?
Yeah,
PA Paths of Connection, PathsofConnection.com.
thank you. Yeah, I will
And
add
my
that.
my book, Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture, an adventure of a lifetime, is purchasable on Amazon, wherever books are sold, also on my website, and it just came out in Audible. So
Amazing.
it's on Audible, iTunes, Amazon.
I love Audible. I'm gonna check it out there. I can't wait. Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
just am all about childhood trauma healing and embodiment and somatic work. And I think you're a testament to what happens when you do this work and when you're living in your purpose and helping other people with this. So thank you so much for the work that you do. And I really, really enjoyed this conversation. It's kind of my favorite thing to do is to nerd out and talk about this. So thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Really my pleasure.